Alexander Stone had built his empire from nothing. At 32, he owned one of the biggest tech companies in the world. His name appeared on magazine covers, and people whispered about his cold business style in boardrooms across the country. But what they didn't know was how empty his penthouse felt every night. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. Alexander sat in his home office, fingers flying across his laptop keyboard as he reviewed quarterly reports. The numbers were good, better than good actually, but somehow they felt meaningless. He glanced at his watch. 7:30 in the morning, and he'd already been working for 2 hours. His housekeeper had quit the week before. Something about wanting to spend more time with her grandchildren. Alexander barely remembered her name. In 5 years, he'd gone through 12 different housekeepers. They all blended together in his mind, efficient, quiet, invisible. The doorbell rang at exactly 8 o'clock. Alexander looked up from his screen, annoyed at the interruption. He'd told the cleaning agency to send someone new, but he hoped. They understood his rules. No small talk, no personal questions. Just clean the house and leave. He grabbed his coffee mug and walked toward the kitchen, planning to grab his usual black coffee and retreat back to his office. The morning routine never changed. Coffee, work, more work, then maybe some food if he remembered to eat. But when he rounded the corner into his spacious living room, Alexander stopped walking. Completely stopped. Near the tall windows that overlooked the city, a young woman was arranging white lilies in a crystal vase. The morning sunlight streamed through the glass, creating a soft glow around her. She moved with such gentle care, adjusting each flower like it mattered, like it was art, not just a chore. Alexander had never paid attention to flowers before. His previous housekeepers just dusted around whatever was there, but this woman had brought fresh ones. She'd chosen white lilies, simple, elegant, beautiful. She turned around when she heard his footsteps, and Alexander felt something strange happen in his chest. Her smile was warm and genuine, reaching her dark eyes. It wasn't the nervous, scared smile he usually got from employees. It was real. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but confident. "You must be Mr. Stone. I'm Isabella Rivera. The agency sent me." Alexander opened his mouth to respond with his usual cold greeting. Instead, what came out was a weird choking sound. His coffee mug slipped in his hand and he had to grab it quickly to keep from dropping it. Yes. He cleared his throat, feeling heat creep up his neck. "Alexander, I mean Mr. Stone." "Yes." Isabella's eyebrows raised slightly, but her smile didn't fade. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Stone. I hope those flowers are okay. I noticed there weren't any fresh ones, and the room seemed like it needed some life. Life. That was exactly what had been missing from his sterile penthouse. Alexander looked around his living room, all expensive furniture and cold surfaces. He'd never noticed how lifeless it looked until now. "They're fine," he managed to say, though his voice sounded strange to his own ears. Isabella nodded and moved to pick up her cleaning supplies. "I'll start with the kitchen, if that works for you. I brought some fresh coffee beans too. The ones you had looked a bit old." Alexander wanted to tell her that he didn't care about coffee beans, that he just needed her to clean and stay out of his way. But watching her move around his space with such natural grace, he found himself nodding instead. "That's thoughtful," he said. As Isabella walked toward the kitchen, Alexander noticed she was humming quietly. It was a soft, happy sound that filled the silence he'd grown used to. For a moment, he just stood there, listening. Then he realized he was staring and quickly retreated to his office. But once he sat down at his desk, he couldn't focus on his computer screen. His mind kept wandering to the woman in his kitchen, to her warm smile and the way she'd made his apartment feel different just by being there. After 30 minutes of pretending to work, Alexander gave up. He walked back to the kitchen, telling himself he needed more coffee. Isabella was there, wiping down counters that already looked spotless. She'd organized everything perfectly, but it didn't feel sterile anymore. It felt Homie. The coffee's ready, she said without looking up. I wasn't sure how you like it, so I made it medium strength. Alexander poured himself a cup and took a sip. It was perfect. Much better than his usual bitter black coffee. It's good, he said, then immediately felt stupid for stating the obvious. Isabella glanced at him with that same warm smile. I'm glad. My grandmother always said coffee should taste like comfort, not punishment. That made Alexander almost smile. Almost. He caught himself before his mouth could betray him. Your grandmother sounds wise. She was. She taught me that. Taking care of a home isn't just about cleaning. It's about creating a space where people can breathe. Alexander looked around his kitchen. Really looked at it. Isabella had done something he couldn't quite name. The same expensive appliances were there, the same marble countertops, but everything felt warmer somehow. Have you been doing this long? He asked, then immediately regretted it. He didn't usually make small talk with employees. A few years, Isabella said, moving to clean the windows. I'm working my way through business school, night classes, business school. Alexander felt a spark of interest he didn't expect. What's your focus? Marketing and communications. I want to start my own consulting company someday. She paused in her cleaning. What about you? I mean, besides running Stone Industries. Did you always want to be in tech? No one ever asked Alexander personal questions anymore. Business associates wanted to know about profits and market share. His few remaining friends only called when they needed something. But Isabella asked like she actually cared about the answer. I started coding when I was 12, he heard himself say. My parents thought it was a waste of time. Isabella turned to look at him fully. But you proved them wrong. I guess so. Alexander took another sip of coffee, surprised by how easy it was to talk to her. What made you choose business? I like solving problems, finding ways to help people connect with what they need. Isabella smiled. Plus, I've always been good at organizing chaos. Alexander looked around his pristine kitchen. This doesn't look very chaotic. You should see my apartment, Isabella laughed, and the sound made something warm settle in Alexander's chest. They talked for another few minutes. Just simple conversation about school and work and life. Alexander couldn't remember the last time he'd had a normal conversation with someone. No agenda, no business deals, no one trying to impress him or get something from him. When Isabella excused herself to continue cleaning other rooms, Alexander reluctantly returned to his office. But throughout the morning, he found himself listening for her quiet humming, for the soft sounds of her moving through his space. Around noon, there was a gentle knock on his office door. Alexander looked up to find Isabella standing there with a sandwich and a glass of water. I noticed you hadn't eaten anything, she said. I made this from what you had in the kitchen. I hope that's okay. Alexander stared at the sandwich. In 5 years, no housekeeper had ever brought him food. Most of them barely acknowledged his existence beyond a polite greeting. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know. But you looked busy, and everyone needs to eat. She set the plate on his desk and turned to leave, but Alexander found himself speaking before she reached the door. Isabella? She looked back at him, eyebrows raised in question. Thank you. Her smile was like sunshine. You're welcome, Mr. Stone. After she left, Alexander sat staring at the sandwich for a long moment. Such a simple gesture, but it felt like the most thoughtful thing anyone had done for him in years. He took a bite and realized he was hungrier than he'd thought. For the rest of the day, Alexander found himself making excuses to leave his office. He needed water from the kitchen. He had to check something in the living room. Each time, he hoped to catch a glimpse of Isabella, to maybe have another brief conversation. By the time she finished her work and prepared to leave, Alexander felt genuinely disappointed. His apartment would go back to being silent and empty. I'll see you Thursday, Isabella said, gathering her things by the door. Thursday, Alexander repeated, already counting the hours. After she left, Alexander walked through his penthouse. Everything was perfectly clean as always, but now it felt different. The white lilies caught the afternoon light. The kitchen still smelled faintly like the good coffee. There was a sense of warmth that hadn't been there that morning. That night, Alexander lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Isabella's laugh and the way she'd asked about his life like it mattered. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to being home. He had no idea that his carefully controlled world was about to change completely. Alexander couldn't stop thinking about Thursday. For the first time in his career, he found himself watching the clock, waiting for the day to end so the next one could begin. When Thursday morning finally arrived, he was already dressed and sitting in his kitchen at 7:30, pretending to read emails on his phone. The truth was, he'd been awake since 5, changing his shirt 3 times and wondering if he was losing his mind. CEOs didn't get nervous about their housekeepers arriving, but when the doorbell rang at exactly 8 o'clock, Alexander's heart jumped like he was 16 again. "Good morning, Mr. Stone," Isabella said as he opened the door. She carried fresh flowers again, yellow roses this time, and that same warm smile that had been haunting his thoughts for 2 days. "Alexander," he said quickly. "You can call me Alexander." Isabella looked surprised for a moment, then nodded. "Alexander it is." The way she said his name made something flutter in his chest. He stepped aside to let her in, trying not to notice how her presence immediately made his apartment feel alive again. Over the next few weeks, a strange routine developed. Alexander, who used to spend 14 hours a day at his office, suddenly found reasons to work from home. He told his assistant he needed quiet time for strategic planning. He told his business partners he was focusing on long-term projects. The truth was much simpler. He wanted to be near Isabella. At first, he tried to be subtle about it. He'd emerge from his office when he heard her humming in the living room, claiming he needed coffee, or he'd walk through the kitchen when she was there, saying he had to check something. But his excuses got weaker as the days passed, and he suspected Isabella was starting to notice. She never seemed annoyed by his presence, though. Instead, she would ask about his work, genuinely interested in what he was building at his company. Alexander found himself explaining complex business strategies to her, surprised by how easily she understood everything. "So you're essentially creating a platform that connects small businesses with resources they couldn't access on their own?" Isabella asked one morning, organizing his bookshelf while he pretended to review contracts at the kitchen counter. Alexander looked up, impressed. "That's exactly right. Most people don't grasp that concept so quickly." "It makes sense," Isabella said, carefully dusting a book about entrepreneurship. "It's like what I do here in a way. I take care of the details so you can focus on the bigger picture." The comparison was so simple yet so accurate that Alexander found himself staring at her. Isabella had a way of seeing straight to the heart of things, cutting through all the complexity he usually surrounded himself with. As the days passed, their conversations grew longer. Alexander learned that Isabella was taking night classes, 4 days a week, working toward her business degree while supporting herself with cleaning jobs. She never complained about being tired, never mentioned how hard it must be to work all day and study all night. But Alexander noticed things. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes some mornings, the way she sometimes paused and rubbed her temples when she thought he wasn't looking. So he started leaving things for her. A comfortable chair moved near the windows where the light was better, fresh fruit in the kitchen, extra towels so she wouldn't have to carry heavy loads. Isabella never said anything about these small changes, but she would smile a little wider when she noticed them. And Alexander, who had built an empire by paying attention to details, treasured every one of those smiles. The shift in their relationship happened on a Wednesday morning, in Alexander's 4th week of working from home. He'd been dealing with a hostile takeover attempt at his company, 3 sleepless nights of phone calls with lawyers, emergency board meetings, and aggressive negotiations. The stress was eating him alive. Isabella arrived to find Alexander sitting at his kitchen counter, still in yesterday's clothes, surrounded by legal documents and empty coffee cups. His hands were shaking slightly as he tried to read a contract, and his breathing was too fast. "Alexander?" Isabella's voice sounded far away. "Are you okay?" He tried to answer, tried to tell her he was fine, but suddenly his chest felt tight and the room started spinning. He gripped the edge of the counter, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Isabella was beside him in seconds. She didn't panic, didn't ask a dozen questions. Instead, she placed her hand gently on his back and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Look at me," she said. "Just focus on my voice. You're having a panic attack, but you're safe. I'm here." Alexander forced himself to meet her eyes. They were dark and steady, full of quiet strength. "Now breathe with me," Isabella continued. "In for 4 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. Now out for 4 counts. She guided him through the breathing exercise, her hand a steady presence on his back. Slowly, gradually, the tightness in his chest began to ease. The room stopped spinning. His heartbeat slowed to something close to normal. When it was over, Alexander slumped against the counter, embarrassed and shaken. He was a CEO, a man who faced down corporate sharks and billion-dollar deals. He wasn't supposed to fall apart over paperwork. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. I don't usually." "You don't have to apologize," Isabella said, softly. She moved to pour him a glass of water, then sat down beside him. "When's the last time you slept?" Alexander had to think about it. Monday night, maybe? And eaten a real meal? He couldn't remember that either. Isabella shook her head, but not in judgment, in concern. "You can't run on empty forever, Alexander. Even successful CEOs are still human." Something about the way she said it, gentle but firm, caring but honest, broke through the walls Alexander had built around himself. He found himself talking, really talking, for the first time in years. He told her about the takeover attempt, about the lawyers who spoke in riddles and the board members who were more interested in protecting their own investments than supporting his vision. He talked about the loneliness of being at the top, how success had somehow left him more isolated than failure ever had. Isabella listened without interrupting, without offering empty reassurances or trying to solve his problems. She just listened, and somehow that was exactly what he needed. "It sounds like you're fighting for something you really believe in," she said when he finished. "That's not weakness, that's strength." "It doesn't feel like strength when you're having panic attacks in your kitchen," Alexander said bitterly. "Strength isn't about never feeling scared or overwhelmed," Isabella replied. "It's about caring enough to keep going even when you do feel those things." Alexander looked at her, really looked at her. Isabella was 28 years old, working multiple jobs and going to school at night. She didn't have his advantages, his resources, his safety net, yet she faced her challenges with more grace and courage than he'd shown in years. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you stay so optimistic?" Isabella smiled, but it was softer now, more vulnerable. "I don't, always. Some days are really hard, but I've learned that life is too short to spend it being afraid of everything. That could go wrong." That evening, after Isabella had gone home and Alexander had successfully navigated another crisis call with his lawyers, he sat in his living room looking at the yellow roses she'd brought that morning. They were still fresh, still beautiful, still bringing life to his sterile space. For the first time, he admitted to himself what he'd been trying to ignore for weeks. He wasn't just grateful to Isabella for her work, or impressed by her intelligence, or charmed by her warmth. He was falling for her, completely, terrifyingly falling for his housekeeper, Alexander Stone, who controlled every aspect of his business empire, who planned every move 3 steps ahead, who never let emotions interfere with logic, was head over heels for a woman who saw him not as a powerful CEO but simply as Alexander, a man who needed someone to remind him to eat lunch and breathe through panic attacks. The realization should have scared him. Instead, for the first time in weeks, he felt completely calm. Alexander started leaving notes. It began innocently enough. The morning after Isabella helped him through his panic attack, he left a simple "thank you" written on expensive letterhead beside the coffee maker. When Isabella found it, she smiled and tucked it into her pocket without saying anything. The next week there was another note. The flowers make the whole place feel different. Thank you. Then another. Hope your exam went well last night. Each message was brief, formal, written in Alexander's careful handwriting. Isabella saved every single one. She never mentioned the notes directly, but Alexander caught her reading them, sometimes a soft smile playing on her lips. It encouraged him to keep writing, though he agonized over every word. What did you say to someone who was slowly becoming the best part of your day? One Thursday morning, Isabella found something different beside her usual note, a book about sustainable business practices with a yellow sticky note attached. Thought you might find this interesting for your marketing class. Isabella stared at the book for a long moment. It was a recent publication, expensive, exactly the kind of resource her professors recommended but she couldn't afford. Alexander had been listening when she mentioned struggling with her sustainability marketing project. When she saw him later that morning, she held up the book. Alexander, this is too much. He looked embarrassed, like a schoolboy caught passing notes. It's just a book. I had an extra copy. Isabella knew that was a lie. The book still had the receipt inside, purchased just yesterday. But she also knew that calling him out would embarrass him further, so she simply said, "Thank you. This will really help." The smile he gave her in return was worth more than the book itself. As spring turned toward summer, their conversations evolved from polite exchanges to something deeper. Alexander learned that Isabella's parents had immigrated from Colombia when she was 5, working multiple jobs to give their children better opportunities. She talked about her father, who cleaned office buildings at night and drove a taxi during the day, never complaining about being tired. He always said that honest work is nothing to be ashamed of, Isabella told Alexander one morning as she organized his home library. That every job has dignity if you do it with pride. Alexander watched her handle his books with the same care she brought to everything else. Your parents sound like remarkable people. They are. They sacrificed everything so my brother and I could go to college? Isabella paused, holding a book about entrepreneurship. Sometimes I worry I'm not moving fast enough, like I should be further along by now. You're working full-time and going to school at night, Alexander said. That's incredible. Isabella shrugged, but he could see the doubt in her eyes. Some of my classmates have internships at big companies, connections through their families. I'm just trying to keep up. Alexander wanted to tell her that she was smarter and more capable than any intern his company had ever hired. He wanted to offer her connections, opportunities, anything to help her succeed. But he held back, knowing that Isabella's pride was part of what made her so extraordinary. Instead, he started leaving different kinds of resources. Articles about marketing strategies, printed from business journals she couldn't access, case studies from successful small businesses, information about scholarship programs and networking events for business students. Isabella never asked where the materials came from, but Alexander could see her studying them late into the evening when she thought he wasn't looking. Sometimes, he would find her at his kitchen table during her lunch break, making notes in the margins of the articles he'd left her. Their relationship began shifting in small, almost invisible ways. When Isabella brought Alexander his afternoon coffee, their fingers would brush as she handed him the cup. The contact lasted a fraction of a second longer than necessary, both of them hyper-aware of the touch. Alexander found himself timing his breaks to coincide with Isabella's work in different rooms. If she was cleaning the living room, he suddenly needed to check something on his laptop at the coffee table. If she was in the kitchen, he discovered he was hungry. Isabella, for her part, started humming more when Alexander was around. She would ask his opinion on things that had nothing to do with work, whether the new curtains looked better open or closed, if he preferred the magazines arranged by date or topic. Small questions that felt like invitations to be part of his own home. The breakthrough moment came on a rainy Wednesday in June. Alexander was in his office, struggling with a presentation for his board of directors. He'd been working on it for hours, but something was missing. The numbers were solid, the strategy was sound, but it felt cold and disconnected. Isabella knocked softly on his door. Sorry to interrupt. I brought you some tea. She set a steaming mug beside his laptop and glanced at his computer screen. Presentation for the board? Alexander nodded, rubbing his tired eyes. I can't figure out what's wrong with it. It's all there, but it feels like it's missing the heart, Isabella asked gently. He looked up at her, surprised. Exactly. Isabella hesitated for a moment, then asked, Would you mind if I looked? Sometimes a fresh perspective helps. Alexander was about to say no automatically. He never shared unfinished work with anyone, certainly not with someone outside his company, but something about Isabella's quiet confidence made him slide his laptop toward her. She read through his presentation carefully, asking thoughtful questions about his goals and his audience. Then she made a suggestion that was so simple, so perfect, that Alexander wondered why he hadn't thought of it himself. What if you started with a story, she said. Not about numbers or market share, but about a real small business that your platform helped. Make it personal. Alexander stared at her. That's brilliant. Isabella blushed, but she continued. People connect with stories. Your board members are successful, but they all started somewhere. Remind them why this matters. They worked together for the next hour, Isabella asking questions that helped Alexander clarify his thoughts, offering suggestions that made his presentation stronger. She had an intuitive understanding of communication that impressed him more than any MBA degree could have. When they finished, Alexander's presentation had been transformed from a dry business report into a compelling narrative about innovation and opportunity. It was still professional, still packed with data, but now it had life. Isabella, Alexander said as she prepared to continue her cleaning. That was incredible. You have a real gift for this. She smiled, but he could see she was pleased. I told you I like solving problems. That evening, after Isabella had gone home, Alexander sat in his office looking at the presentation they'd created together. For the first time in his career, he'd collaborated with someone not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And the result was better than anything he could have produced alone. He thought about Isabella's questions, her insights, the way she'd immediately understood what he was trying to achieve. She wasn't just smart, she was intuitive, creative, and had a natural understanding of human nature that most business school graduates spent years trying to develop. Alexander picked up his pen and started writing another note, but this one was different from all the others. Thank you for your help today. You made something good into something great. Your ideas were exactly what I needed. I hope you know how talented you are. He paused, then added, I'm grateful every day that you're here. As he sealed the note, Alexander realized that somewhere along the way, Isabella had stopped being just his housekeeper. She was his confidant, his collaborator, the person whose opinion he valued most. The only question now was whether she felt the same way about him. The next morning, Alexander left the note beside a small potted orchid, Isabella's favorite flower, as he'd learned from weeks of careful observation. When Isabella found both the note and the plant, she stood perfectly still for a long moment, reading his words twice. Then she looked toward Alexander's office, where he was pretending to work, while actually watching for her reaction. Their eyes met through the glass door, and Isabella's smile was different this time. Warmer, more personal. For the first time since this all began, Alexander dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, the most important presentation of his life wouldn't be the one he gave to his board. It would be the one where he finally told Isabella how he felt about her. The change in Alexander was impossible to miss. His business partners noticed it first during their weekly strategy meeting. Instead of his usual sharp, cold efficiency, Alexander seemed distracted. He smiled at inappropriate moments, checked his phone more often, and even cut one meeting short, claiming he had something important to handle at home. What's gotten into Stone? His business partner, Robert, asked their mutual friend after Alexander left early for the third time that month. He's acting like a completely different person. The media picked up on it too. Business journals that once described Alexander as ruthlessly focused and emotionally detached started using words like approachable and surprisingly warm in their articles. His employees whispered in the hallways about how their CEO had actually asked someone about their weekend, how he'd smiled in the elevator, how he seemed almost human. Alexander didn't care about any of it. For the first time in his adult life, work wasn't the most important thing in his day. That honor belonged to the hours he spent at home with Isabella, their conversations over coffee, the way her face lit up when she talked about her dreams for the future. But happiness, Alexander was learning, made you vulnerable in ways that success never did. The call came on a Tuesday morning in July. Alexander was in his kitchen, discussing weekend plans with Isabella, trying to work up the courage to ask if she'd like to see a new art exhibit with him, when his phone rang. "Alexander, darling." The voice on the other end was crisp, commanding, and unfortunately familiar. "I'm in the lobby of your building. Be a dear and have the doorman send me up." Alexander's blood turned cold. "Mother, you didn't say you were coming to the city." "I wanted to surprise you. We need to discuss some important matters." Before Alexander could protest, the line went dead. He turned to Isabella, who was politely pretending not to have overheard while organizing his bookshelf. "My mother is coming up," he said, panic creeping into his voice. She can be." Isabella turned to face him, immediately sensing his distress. "It's okay. I'll just finish in the back rooms while she's here." "Isabella, she might say things." Alexander started, but the elevator chimed, announcing his mother's arrival. Victoria Stone swept into the penthouse like she owned it, which, in a way, she did. Her family's money had given Alexander his start, and she'd never let him forget it. Tall, elegantly dressed, and sharp as a blade, she commanded attention wherever she went. "Alexander!" She kissed the air beside his cheek, her eyes already scanning the apartment. "The place looks different. Warmer somehow." Her gaze landed on the fresh flowers on the coffee table, the carefully arranged books, the small touches that made the space feel like a home instead of a showroom. "I've made some changes," Alexander said carefully. "I can see that." Victoria's tone suggested she wasn't entirely pleased. "Where's Mrs. Patterson? I wanted to compliment her on the improvements." "Mrs. Patterson left months ago. I have someone new now." As if summoned by their conversation, Isabella appeared from the hallway carrying a basket of fresh towels. She moved quietly, trying not to intrude, but Victoria's sharp eyes caught the movement immediately. "Ah," Victoria said, her voice changing in a way that made Alexander's stomach drop. "The new help." The word help dripped with condescension. Alexander saw Isabella stiffen slightly, though her expression remained politely neutral as she continued toward the linen closet. "Mother," Alexander said, a warning note in his voice. But Victoria was just getting started. She settled herself on the expensive leather sofa, her posture making it clear she expected Alexander's full attention. "I'm glad I came when I did," she continued loud enough for Isabella to hear. "We need to discuss your future, particularly your social obligations. The Worthington's daughter is back from Paris. Lovely girl, excellent family connections. I've arranged for you to meet her at the charity gala next month." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I'm not interested in meeting anyone." "Don't be ridiculous. You're 32, Alexander. It's time you settled down with someone appropriate. Someone from our world who understands the responsibilities that come with the Stone name." From the corner of his eye, Alexander saw Isabella pause in the hallway. She wasn't eavesdropping, but the apartment's open layout made privacy impossible. "Someone who can be a proper partner in your business and social life," Victoria continued, oblivious to or ignoring Alexander's growing anger. "Not like these working girls who wouldn't know how to handle real responsibility." The casual cruelty in her voice made Alexander's hands clench into fists. He glanced toward Isabella, who had gone very still, her back straight and tense. "Mother, that's enough. I'm simply being practical, darling. Look at this place. It's lovely. But whoever is managing it clearly doesn't understand that you need someone who can entertain properly, handle the social aspects of your position. The help can make things pretty, but they can't make them suitable for someone of your standing." Every word was a knife, deliberately designed to reinforce the gulf between Alexander's world and Isabella's. Victoria wasn't just being thoughtless. She was being strategic, making sure that any romantic notions her son might have developed would be crushed under the weight of social reality. Alexander saw the exact moment Isabella's composure cracked. Her shoulders sagged just slightly, and she quickened her pace toward the back of the apartment, but not before he caught the hurt in her eyes, the way her face had gone carefully blank. "I need to speak with you privately," Alexander said to his mother, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Of course, dear, perhaps your girl could make us some tea while we talk." The casual dismissal was the final straw. Alexander stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Her name is Isabella," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "And she's not my girl. She's a brilliant business student who works harder than anyone I know and deserves more respect than you're giving her." Victoria raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by his vehemence. "Alexander, I hope you're not developing inappropriate feelings for the staff. That never ends well." "Get out." "Excuse me?" "I said get out. This is my home and I won't have you insulting someone I care about." Victoria stood slowly, her face a mask of cold fury. "I see I arrived just in time. This little infatuation is clearly affecting your judgment. When you come to your senses, you'll remember who your real family is." She gathered her purse and coat with theatrical precision. "The Worthington girl will be at the gala whether you like it or not. Try to remember your obligations, Alexander, and your breeding." After she left, the apartment felt like a tomb. Alexander stood in his living room, hands shaking with rage and regret, staring at the flowers Isabella had arranged that morning. They seemed to mock him now, a reminder of the happiness that had just been poisoned by his mother's cruelty. He found Isabella in the laundry room, mechanically folding towels with fierce concentration. Her movements were too quick, too precise, the way people worked when they were trying not to think about something painful. "Isabella," he said softly. She didn't look up. "It's fine, Mr. Stone, I understand." The return to his formal name hit him like a physical blow. "It's not fine. What she said was wrong." "Was it?" Isabella finally met his eyes and he saw a world of hurt there. "She's right about one thing. We're from completely different worlds. I clean houses and take night classes. You run a billion-dollar company and go to charity galas with appropriate people. I don't care about any of that." Isabella's laugh was bitter. "Maybe you don't, but everyone else does. Your mother, your business associates, the newspapers that write about you." I saw how she looked at me, Alexander. Like I was invisible. Like I was nothing. "You're not nothing, you're everything." The words slipped out before he could stop them, raw and honest and completely vulnerable. Isabella stared at him, her eyes wide with surprise and something that might have been hope. But then she shook her head, stepping back. "I can't do this anymore." She walked past him to the kitchen, where she pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse. "I'm giving you my 2 weeks' notice. I found another position that better fits my schedule." Alexander took the letter with numb fingers. "Isabella, please don't let her win." "This isn't about winning or losing," Isabella said quietly. "It's about reality. Your mother made it very clear where I stand in your world. And maybe it's better this way before things get more complicated." She gathered her cleaning supplies and headed for the door, pausing only to look back at him one more time. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "These past few months have been the best part of my day, too." Then she was gone, leaving Alexander alone in his pristine penthouse with nothing but the echo of her words and the devastating realization that he'd found love only to lose it to the very success that had once defined him. That night, Alexander sat surrounded by all the notes he'd written to Isabella, reading them like love letters to a future that had just slipped through his fingers. For 2 weeks, Alexander lived like a ghost in his own home. The penthouse felt empty in ways that had nothing to do with furniture or space. The flowers Isabella had left behind wilted and died. The coffee tasted bitter again. The silence was deafening. Alexander threw himself back into work with a vengeance that surprised even his hardest-driving employees. He stayed at the office until midnight, came in at dawn and spoke to his staff in the same cold, clipped tones they remembered from before Isabella had changed him. The warmth was gone, replaced by something darker and more desperate. "He's worse than he was before," his assistant whispered to a colleague. At least the old Alexander was just distant. This one seems angry at the world. His business partners noticed too. Alexander closed deals with ruthless efficiency, but there was no satisfaction in his victories. He was running from something, working himself to exhaustion to avoid thinking about what he'd lost. But late at night, alone in his sterile penthouse, Alexander couldn't escape the truth. He missed Isabella with an ache that felt physical. He missed her laugh, her questions about his work, the way she made his house feel like a home. He missed the man he'd become when she was around. Softer, more human, more alive. His friend, Robert, finally confronted him during a business dinner that Alexander had barely touched. "What happened to you?" Robert asked bluntly. 3 months ago, you were actually happy for the first time since I've known you. Now you look like you haven't slept in weeks." Alexander stared at his untouched food. "I made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "The kind where you find something perfect and let it slip away because you're too scared to fight for it." Robert leaned back in his chair, studying his friend's haggard face. "This is about a woman, isn't it?" Alexander nodded, not trusting his voice. "So fix it," Robert said simply. "Whatever you did, apologize. Whatever wall is between you, tear it down. Life's too short to waste it being miserable over pride." That night, Alexander sat in his home office, staring at a blank piece of paper. He'd written dozens of letters to Isabella over the past 2 weeks, but he'd thrown them all away. Nothing seemed adequate to express what he needed to say. What? He'd realized too late. Finally, he stopped trying to be eloquent and just wrote from his heart. "Isabella, I know I have no right to ask for your time or attention after what happened. I know my mother's words hurt you, and I know I should have defended you better, sooner, stronger. I failed you when you needed me most, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I need you to know something. You changed me. Not just my house or my routine, but me. You showed me what it meant to be truly seen by another person, to have someone care about who I am rather than what I own. You made me want to be better, kinder, more human. I don't care what my mother thinks or what society expects or what anyone says about us being from different worlds. The only world that matters to me is the one where you and I can be together. I love you, Isabella. I love your intelligence, your strength, your kindness, and the way you see possibilities where others see problems. I love how you made my cold house feel warm and how you made me remember what it felt like to hope for something beyond business success. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. If you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that love matters more than status, that what we have together is worth fighting for. I'll be waiting at Central Park, by the bench near the Rose Garden, every evening at 6 o'clock, until you come, even if it takes forever. All my love, Alexander. He folded the letter carefully and drove to Isabella's apartment building, his hands shaking as he slipped it under her door. 3 days passed with no response. Alexander kept his promise, sitting on the bench every evening at 6, watching the path for any sign of Isabella. Joggers passed him, families walked by, couples strolled through the garden, but Isabella never came. On the 4th evening, Alexander was beginning to lose hope when he saw a familiar figure walking slowly down the path. Isabella looked tired, older somehow, but she was there. She was actually there. Alexander stood up as she approached, his heart hammering in his chest. "You've been coming here every night?" Isabella asked, stopping a few feet away from him. "I told you I would." Isabella studied his face, taking in the dark circles under his eyes, the desperate hope in his expression. "Alexander, what are we doing? Your mother was right about one thing. We really are from different worlds." "So what?" Alexander stepped closer, his voice passionate. "Romeo and Juliet were from different families. Beauty and the Beast were from different species. Every great love story is about people who shouldn't be together, but choose each other anyway." Despite everything, Isabella smiled a little at that. "Did you just compare us to fairy tales?" If that's what it takes. Alexander's voice grew serious. Isabella, I know my world can be cruel and judgmental. I know my mother's words hurt you, and I know there will be people who don't understand what we have. But I also know that I've never been happier than I was when you were in my life. Isabella looked down at her hands. It's not just about your mother, Alexander. It's about reality. You go to charity galas and board meetings. I clean houses and take night classes. How does that work? However we want it to work. Alexander took another step closer. Isabella, you're brilliant. You have ideas that could change businesses, insights that CEOs would pay millions for. You're not just someone who cleans houses. You're someone who sees potential and makes things better. Wherever you go. He pulled out another piece of paper, this one official looking. I've been doing research about business consulting firms. I want to help you start your own company, not as charity, not as guilt money, but as an investment in someone I believe in completely. Isabella stared at the business plan he'd prepared, her eyes wide. Alexander, it's what you deserve. A chance to build something of your own, to show the world what I already know, that you're extraordinary. Tears started forming in Isabella's eyes. Why are you doing this? Because I love you, Alexander said simply. Because when I imagine my future, you're in every single picture. Because you make me want to be the kind of man who deserves you. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, looking at the business plan, then at Alexander's hopeful face. Finally, she spoke. Your mother will never approve of me. Then she'll have to learn to live with disappointment, Alexander said firmly. I spent my whole life trying to live up to other people's expectations, but the only person whose approval I really want is yours. Isabella stepped closer, close enough that Alexander could see the tears on her cheeks. I missed you too, she whispered. So much it hurt. Alexander reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face gently in his hands. I'm sorry I let you down. I'm sorry I didn't fight for you sooner. But I'm fighting now and I won't stop. Promise me something, Isabella said, her voice barely audible. Anything. Promise me we'll face everything together, the good times and the difficult ones, your world and mine. I promise, Alexander said. And then he kissed her, soft and gentle and full of all the love he'd been holding back. When they broke apart, Isabella smiled. The first real smile Alexander had seen from her since his mother's visit. So, she said, looking at the business plan again, tell me more about this consulting company idea. Alexander laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in weeks. Well, I happen to know this brilliant CEO who might be interested in being your first client. 6 months later, Isabella graduated from business school with honors. Alexander was in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else in the auditorium. Her parents were there too, beaming with pride as their daughter walked across the stage. Isabella's consulting firm launched 3 months after that, with Alexander as her first official client and biggest supporter. She specialized in helping small businesses develop sustainable growth strategies, and her success was immediate and entirely her own. Their engagement announcement made headlines, not because of Alexander's wealth, but because of the love story behind it. Business magazines wrote about the CEO who'd found his heart through his housekeeper, and romance blogs swooned over the fairy tale that had played out in a Manhattan penthouse. Victoria Stone attended their wedding, though she spent most of the reception looking like she'd swallowed something sour. But when she saw Alexander and Isabella dancing together, saw the pure joy on her son's face, even she had to admit that love had transformed him into someone better than he'd ever been. In his wedding vows, Alexander promised Isabella that she would never again be invisible to anyone, least of all him. She was his partner, his equal, his greatest love, and the woman who had taught him that the most important business deal of his life wasn't about money or power. It was about finding someone who saw his heart and chose to stay.